Have you ever asked yourself, what are the essential components of your computer? Can you differentiate between those components of your computer that are essential or main and those that are not? This is the purpose of today's lecture. So, we are going to see the main components of a computer, the essential ones, and then we are going to see the remaining that we divide between the peripherals and different storage. Your computer is probably made of a monitor, a tower, a keyboard you type with, a mouse of course, headphones to listen to music or to hear someone, and then possibly some printer. But are all these necessary or essential components of your computer? This is the purpose of today's lecture. Remember, we have seen in previous lecture that a computer, its main purpose is to receive, first of all, process, store, and output the data. To represent this in a figure or a schema, we have the input, peripherals, then we have some components to process, so we receive, we process, and then we output, and possibly we are going to store the information. So we differentiate between the main components of a computer, those that we call peripherals, to be able to input the data and to output, and then we have some storage. We are going to see between all of these, those that are essential and those that are not. When you take your tower, which is the most important part of your computer, this is the computer actually. If you open it, you will see different components inside. So, for instance, you see the CD drive, the CD and DVD drive that you can take off. You see that you have the power supply, the component that you use to switch on your computer, and you have different cards. But what is important, you will see inside some cables, and behind these cables we have the most important one that we call the motherboard. Most of the time it is behind your cables. Let's dive into this motherboard. It has this shape, it's a square shape where you find different electronic pieces, but the most important parts of this piece, among these pieces, is first of all what we call the RAM or the memory. I'm going to explain later. Then the CPU. This is the number one most important piece of your computer. This is the central and processing unit. When you buy your computer, most of the time you will find, for instance, Intel inside or AMD. This is the name of your chip, the central processing unit. And then you will find another piece that we call the ROM. So let's dive into and see the details of all these components. What about the RAM? It comes as a slot. You can buy different slots, okay, and you put them inside your motherboard. What does mean RAM? It means random access memory. It is a memory that you can access randomly at any time while your computer is switched on. So it stores data temporarily, and it stores also the running applications. So when you switch on your computer, you load first of all your operating system. For instance, it could be Windows or macOS or Linux, and then it is stored inside this memory. So you cannot run your computer without having this memory. While you are using your computer, you type a document, you type PowerPoint, then everything you type is stored within this memory. So it is of very great importance to have this memory. It is volatile, which means when you switch off, this data is lost from your computer and you cannot retrieve it later on. Of course, the higher capacity of your memory, the better is your computer, which means you can store more applications, you can store more data while you are working. Don't forget, while you are working, once you switch off, everything is lost. Right? The second part, the second most important one is, as a memory, we call it the ROM, which means read-only memory. You cannot write in it, you can only read from it. right? It stores what we call the BIOS for running the system. BIOS stands for Basic Input-Output System. Very first time you switch on your computer controls, it looks if the basic input-output are plugged to your system, and it calls for the operating system to be launched from your computer. So without this ROM, you cannot launch your computer. But what is important is that it is a non-volatile memory, which means even if you switch off and you switch on again your computer, the ROM, the information stored within the ROM is still there. Of course, it has very low capacity, so we don't have much information to store in it, but very important ones. The other most important part is what we call the CPU, which stands for the Central Processing Unit. It is the brain of your computer. This is the component that allows you to process the data. It is also known as a microprocessor. We prefix it with micro because we are talking here about microcomputer. We are not talking about the mini computers or the mainframe, but we are taking the case of the PC we are using in our everyday life. So you have this microcomputer, this CPU, which comes from sometimes Intel, sometimes from AMD, etc. We have very few brands all over the world. These CPUs are divided into the control unit. This is the most important part of your computer. It controls everything. Well, and we have also what we call the arithmetic and logical unit. So the arithmetic unit allows to process formulas like 2 plus 3, 5 minus 1, etc. And the logical unit, which helps knowing if 5 is greater than 2, for instance, etc. So those are the most essential parts of the computer. We call them the main components of a computer. So let's jump to the next one. As we said before, within the tower, we have the motherboard, and within the motherboard, we have those essential parts. All the remaining are either storage or peripherals. So let's see what are the peripherals. If you remember, we have two types. We input the information from this peripheral to the system or to the CPU. They are used to input or supply the data to the computer. So for instance, the keyboard, if you see your keyboard, it is plugged or linked to your computer via some cable. So when you hit a key, the information, a signal is sent from the keyboard through this cable and goes inside your system, and it goes inside the RAM, if you remember. We have others. We have the mouse. When you click, you see something, you drag a window, for instance, so everything is sent to the computer. We have the graphic pad, we have the joysticks, we have microphones. So here we have a speech signal, or we have a webcam, we have a video signal, which means it's from different types of information are sent from different input peripherals and sent to this central processing unit. We have the other side, output, or in terms of definition, they are used to display the data and the programs from the computer. So we send from the RAM to this output. The most used one is, of course, the monitor. Then we have the printer if you want to print, you have the speakers, and then you have the headsets, you have the projector. Those are only examples that are used, plugged to the computer, that are sent. So all these are not considered as essential components. They are only peripherals. And finally, we have storage, which means, if you remember, we said that the RAM is a volatile memory. When you switch off your computer, the information is lost. So in order to be able to retrieve it, we use the storage. So these storage pieces are used to store the data and the programs. So these are non-volatile, which means when you switch off, the information and the data is still stored within these pieces. They are used to store and to retrieve the data from. So memory cards, the hard drives, the floppy disk we have used when we were much younger than today, the pen drives or USB drives, and the optical disks, etc. So as a summary, when you have your computer with all these pieces, remember, not everything is essential. The most essential ones we have, even if you have many components, but remember what is important, what is essential. I am putting in red. You have the RAM. The ROM is important, but later on we are going to use only the RAM, and you have the control and the arithmetic and logical unit. All the others are not essentials, and we divide them between input, output peripherals, and then the storage.